The bank built to break the law. The dark history of money. At one bank, at the same time, you could find the accounts of a Panamanian dictator, a Colombian drug cartel, a Palestinian terror network, an Iraqi weapons program, and an American intelligence agency. You could also find the savings of about 1.5 million ordinary people: taxi drivers in Karachi, shopkeepers in Lagos, pensioners across the Middle East and South Asia who had been told this was a bank for people like them, run by people who understood them. They were all customers of the same institution. It operated in 73 countries. By the late 1980s, it was one of the largest privately owned banks on the planet. And according to the investigators who finally pulled it apart, it had never really been a bank at all. This is the story of BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, though the people who chased it for years came to prefer a different name, the Bank of Crooks and Criminals International. To understand how one institution ended up holding the money of a drug cartel and a spy agency in the same ledgers, you have to go back to a simple, almost idealistic idea. Because BCCI did not begin as a punchline, it began as a promise. Or, depending on which investigator you ask, it began as a trap on the very first day. The man who built it was Agha Hasan Abedi. He was a Pakistani banker with a genuine talent and a genuine grievance. He had watched the great Western banks treat the developing world as an afterthought, somewhere to extract from, not somewhere to serve. His idea was to build a bank that belonged to the global South, a bank for the countries the others ignored, run by people who spoke the language and understood the customer. In 1972, he founded it, with money from Abu Dhabi standing behind him. Sheikh Zayed, the ruler of Abu Dhabi, became its largest shareholder. Abedi gave the bank a face that people in poor countries trusted more than they trusted any bank in London or New York. It funded hospitals, it funded schools, it cultivated an image of doing good. But underneath the image, Abedi made one structural decision that mattered more than anything else. He built the bank to have no home. BCCI was registered in Luxembourg. Its head offices were in London and Karachi. A crucial part of its accounts was audited out of the Grand Cayman Islands, one of the most secretive financial jurisdictions on Earth. It operated, eventually, across 73 countries. And the point of spreading it that thin was that no single country's regulators ever had authority over the whole thing. The Luxembourg authorities saw a piece, the British saw a piece, the Cayman shell, a thing investigators later called the bank within a bank, saw another. Nobody anywhere could see all of it at once. Hold on to that, because it's the entire story. A bank designed so that no one could ever look at the full picture. For years it grew, and grew fast, and the trust that Abedi had built kept the deposits flowing in. The problem started the way these problems usually start, quietly, with one bad bet. In the late 1970s, one of BCCI's biggest borrowers, a shipping group run by a businessman named Abbas Gokal, ran into serious trouble. A normal bank writes off a bad loan, takes the hit, moves on. BCCI did not do that. Instead, it hid the loss. It created fictional transactions to make the bad loans look healthy. When those fictions needed covering, it created more. It started doing something that has a simpler name when an ordinary person does it. It used new customers' deposits to fill the holes left by old ones. This went on, in one form or another, for roughly 15 years. When auditors finally got a real look at the books, they found a fraud that almost sounds like a riddle. BCCI had lent around $1.5 billion to its own shareholders, so they could buy shares in BCCI, using BCCI's own stock as the collateral. The bank was lending people money to buy the bank, then counting that borrowed money as if it were real capital. It was a snake eating its own tail and reporting the meal as profit. To keep a machine like that fed, you need money moving constantly. And here is where the structure Abedi built stopped being a clever way to dodge regulators and became something a great deal darker. BCCI started exactly that. The ability to move money across 73 countries and have it disappear into the gaps between them. For a certain kind of client, that was the most valuable product in the world. Manuel Noriega, the dictator of Panama, ran roughly $23 million through BCCI's London branches. The bank treated him like a prized customer. At one point, it hand-delivered him a $25,000 Persian carpet, because when your client runs a country-sized drug operation, the small courtesies matter. The Medellín cartel used the bank to launder profits. Abu Nidal, one of the most wanted terrorists of the era, used it to move money for arms. One BCCI banker's involvement with him was so close that a London newspaper ran the whole grim absurdity as a front-page headline in the banker's own words, that he had taken Abu Nidal shopping. Saddam Hussein's people used BCCI to buy weapons, including a planned $110 million deal for fighter jets. Ferdinand Marcos parked stolen money there, and the CIA later acknowledged that it too had used BCCI to move money quietly through a global network that left no clean trail. The same feature that made the bank perfect for a cartel made it perfect for an intelligence service. They were buying the identical product. Each step was bigger than the last. From hiding one bad loan to laundering for cartels to secretly and illegally buying American banks through hidden frontmen so it could finally get inside the United States financial system itself. Here is the turn, and it's the thing that makes BCCI more than just a bank that went rotten. When the investigators finally reconstructed what they could, they did not conclude that BCCI was a legitimate bank that had been corrupted over time. They concluded the opposite. The US Senate report said it plainly. The bank had been set up deliberately to avoid centralized regulation, structured from its founding to operate outside the reach of any single authority. The fraud was not a disease the bank caught. It was the blueprint. The no-home structure, the secrecy jurisdictions, the bank within a bank. All of it was the design, present from 1972. The crimes were what the building was built to do. So how do you catch something engineered to be uncatchable? In the end, it wasn't a regulator who cracked it. It was one undercover agent. A US customs investigator named Robert Mazur spent years building a false identity as a well-connected businessman who could move dirty money. The operation was called Sea Chase, run out of Tampa, Florida. Mazur got close to the Medellín cartel and threw them into BCCI's private client world, where he watched bank officers explain, helpfully, how to launder money across their network. To bring it down, he staged a wedding. In 1988, Mazur announced he was getting married and invited the people he'd spent years befriending, the bankers and the drug world contacts, to the celebration in Florida. They came, and at the wedding that was never going to happen, the arrests did. That sting forced the first real charges. In 1990, the bank pleaded guilty to narrow money laundering counts, but the full scope was still buried in the books. Then, in March 1991, the Bank of England ordered the accounting firm Price Waterhouse to dig properly. The investigation had a code name, Sandstorm. The Sandstorm report landed that June. It described fraud so widespread and so deliberate that it was, in places, impossible to even reconstruct what had really happened to the money. After that, there was no saving it. On the 5th of July 1991, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon London time, regulators in 7 countries walked into BCCI's offices at the same coordinated moment and shut the whole thing down. It remains the largest synchronized banking shutdown ever carried out. Around 1 million depositors woke up that day or went to bed that night locked out of their own money. The reckoning, when it came, fell on exactly the wrong people. Abedi, the founder, had suffered a heart attack and was too ill to face trial. He was never extradited. He died years later in Pakistan, a free man. Senior insiders sat out of reach in Abu Dhabi. The dictators and the cartels had mostly already moved on, or had their losses absorbed by people far below them. The ones who actually paid were the depositors, the 1.5 million ordinary customers across the developing world who had believed Abedi's promise. And in Britain, around 6,000 savers who lost their money spent the next decade in court, not chasing the criminals who were gone, but suing the Bank of England for failing to stop it. The case dragged on for years and recovered only fragments. BCCI worked for one reason. No single regulator ever saw the whole picture. It lived in the spaces between countries, in the gaps where one nation's authority ended and the next one's hadn't started. Those gaps were not a flaw the bank discovered by accident. They were a permanent feature of how the world's money is governed, by countries, one at a time, while the money itself moves everywhere at once. The bank is gone. The gaps are exactly where they were. So the question isn't whether another BCCI could exist. It's a simpler one. In a world where money crosses every border in a second, and the people who watch it are still divided by those same borders, who, right now, is able to see the whole picture at once? If you want the next story like this one, this channel publishes a new documentary every week. The sources for everything you just heard are listed in the pinned comment below.